We think we know the people we share our lives with. We welcome them into our homes. We sit across from them at the dinner table, and we share our deepest secrets with them. We believe that the walls of our houses protect us from the dangers of the outside world. But sometimes the threat is already inside. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who are actively working to destroy us. Today, we are going to look at several chilling and bizarre cases where ordinary people discovered that their lives were built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and terrifying secrets. Our first story begins with an 18-year-old woman who believed she had found the perfect relationship. She was young, working a regular job at a mall food court, just trying to make a living and figure out her next steps in life. It was during her shifts at the food court that she met a 19-year-old young man. He was charming, friendly, and they immediately hit it off. They would talk during their breaks, sharing laughs over the fast food counters, and their connection was instant. After about a month of working together and getting to know each other, he asked her to be his girlfriend. She was absolutely thrilled and immediately said yes. For the next several months, the relationship was everything she had ever dreamed of. He would take her out on nice dates, constantly compliment her, and make her feel like the most special person in the world. He was attentive and loving, and she truly believed they had a bright future together. But as the months went on, she started to notice one very specific, very strange detail about his life. He would never let her meet his mother. Whenever she brought up his family, he would easily talk about his father. He explained that his parents had gone through an incredibly messy divorce when he was very young. His father had ended up getting full custody of him, and he grew up with the typical visitation schedule of spending every other weekend and 6 weeks during the summer with his mother. The young woman had met his father and his paternal relatives, and they all seemed perfectly nice. But whenever she asked about his mother, his entire demeanor would change. He would become quiet and evasive. He would tell her that they had a very complicated relationship and that he would explain it all to her later on. She did not want to press him on a sensitive subject, so she decided to respect his boundaries and let it go. But by the third month of their relationship, she noticed another red flag. Whenever they were hanging out, if his mother called or texted him, he would hastily clear the notification from his screen. If he absolutely had to answer her, he would step completely out of the room, even if it was just to send a quick text message. He never wanted the young woman to see what they were talking about. Again, she tried to convince herself that it was just part of their complicated relationship and that she should not worry about it. Fast forward to a weekend about a year into their relationship. For the very first time, the boyfriend was spending the night at her apartment. They had a great evening, went to sleep, but around 3 o'clock in the morning, the young woman suddenly woke up. She had just experienced a terrible nightmare, and her heart was racing. She was sweating and knew she would not be able to fall back asleep anytime soon. In the pitch black room, she rolled over to reach for her phone on the nightstand, wanting to check the time and look at social media to distract her mind. But in the dark, she accidentally grabbed his phone instead of her own. As she picked it up, the screen lit up with a notification. It was a message from his mother. The young woman knew she should not look, but curiosity got the better of her. His phone did not have a passcode, so she swiped the screen open. She decided to look through his messages with his mother, thinking maybe she could finally understand why their relationship was so complicated. But as she began to read, her stomach completely dropped. The messages were not typical mother and son conversations. They were incredibly intimate, deeply explicit, and filled with graphic photos. The text showed a long-term physical relationship, with messages planning their next intimate meetups. The young woman sat in the dark, staring at the screen in absolute disbelief. She felt physically sick. She tried to tell herself that she was still dreaming, that the nightmare had not actually ended. She quietly put the phone back on the nightstand and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, unable to process what she had just seen. A few days later, she could not hold it in anymore. She confronted him about the messages. She expected him to deny it or make up an excuse, but instead, he immediately broke down. He began to cry and told her everything. He claimed that he had been in an intimate relationship with his mother since he was very young. He said they still met up at least once a week, sometimes more, for these intimate sessions, and that this had been going on through the entirety of their relationship. He explained that he had never told his mother about having a girlfriend because he was afraid she would put an end to their weekly meetings. The young woman was completely horrified and disgusted. The man she loved was confessing to something so deeply disturbing that she could barely breathe. Without saying another word, she ran out of her apartment, got into her car, and drove to a town 2 hours away just to get as far away from him as possible. She immediately blocked his number and all of his social media accounts. She changed the locks on her apartment doors and even called out of work for a week so he would not be able to find her there. She was completely traumatized, torn between her love for him and the absolute disgust of what he had confessed to. But the story was about to take an even more bizarre and unsettling turn. After spending a few days in isolation, she decided she needed to do something. She wanted to help him, believing he was a victim of long-term abuse. She decided she would reach out to his father first to explain what was happening, and then meet with her boyfriend to figure out how to get him professional therapy. She unblocked his number and sent a message to both him and his father asking to meet. The father, whom we will call X, agreed to meet her that very afternoon. When she arrived at X's house, she was shaking uncontrollably. Tears were streaming down her face and her voice was cracking. X looked incredibly concerned and sat her down to talk. She took a deep breath and told X that she believed his son had been severely abused by his mother for the last 6 years and that it was still ongoing. But as she spoke, X's expression did not change to anger or shock. Instead, he looked completely puzzled. He stopped her mid-sentence. He looked at her and said that there was absolutely no way this story could be true. The young woman was confused and asked him what he meant. X then revealed the devastating truth. His son's biological mother had died in a violent car accident when the boy was only 8 years old. X had never remarried, and he had never had another girlfriend. His son had not seen or spoken to his mother in 11 years because she was buried in a cemetery. The young woman sat there, completely dumbfounded. Her mind was spinning. If his mother had been dead for over a decade, then who was the person saved in his phone as mom? Who was he exchanging explicit photos and messages with? Who was he meeting up with every single week? She left X's house and drove the 10 minutes to her boyfriend's apartment, her fear turning into boiling anger. She banged on his door, and the moment he opened it, she demanded answers. She asked him about his mother, about the messages, and about the sick story he had told her. He immediately tried to stick to his original story, apologizing and crying. But this time, she lost her temper completely. She screamed at him, telling him that she had just spoken to his father. She yelled that she knew his biological mother had been dead since he was 8 years old. At that moment, the boyfriend went completely silent. He dropped his head and looked at the floor. The young woman was crying hysterically, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he confessed. He told her that he had fabricated the entire story of abuse. The contact saved in his phone as mom was actually his 20-year-old ex-girlfriend, a local bartender. He had been regularly cheating on the young woman with his ex for their entire relationship. He had saved her contact name as mom so that if the young woman ever saw his phone light up with her texts, she would not get suspicious. When she had first confronted him about the messages days prior, he had panicked. He knew he was caught, but he did not want to admit to cheating. So he quickly made up the most horrifying, tragic story he could think of, believing that if she thought he was a victim of severe maternal abuse, she would feel sorry for him, comfort him, and stay with him. The young woman felt an overwhelming wave of betrayal. In the span of a few days, she had gone from believing she was in a happy relationship to thinking her boyfriend was a victim of a horrific crime, to realizing he was a serial cheater who was willing to lie about his dead mother and make up a story of abuse just to cover his tracks. She realized he was a manipulative sociopath. She told him she wanted absolutely nothing to do with him and walked out. He followed her to her car, begging and pleading, but she ignored him completely. She drove home, threw away every single thing he had ever given her, and blocked him again on everything, but he would not leave her alone. He began using fake numbers and burner accounts to try and contact her, begging for forgiveness. One evening, she was sitting in her dark apartment when she heard a loud banging on her door. It was him. He was shouting her name, begging her to let him in so they could talk. She turned off all the lights and sat in complete silence, terrified. She knew he could see her car parked outside, so he knew she was home. She wanted to call the police, but she was not sure if they could do anything. She began making plans to pack her things and go live with her parents in another town just to escape him. In her search for answers, she decided to track down the ex-girlfriend who was saved in his phone. She got her full name and where she worked and managed to get in touch with her. But when they spoke, the story took yet another twist. The ex-girlfriend was completely shocked. She told the young woman that she had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. She claimed she had not spoken to the boyfriend in several months. In fact, she revealed that she actually had a restraining order against him. He had severely harassed her when they broke up years prior, back in 2017. She also revealed that she had almost had a child with him, but chose to terminate the pregnancy because of his erratic and unstable behavior. This meant that the ex-girlfriend was not the one he was currently sleeping with. He had not only lied about his mother, but he had also lied about the identity of the person he was cheating with, using his ex-girlfriend's details to throw her off further. The young woman realized that she had no idea who this man really was, or who he was actually sleeping with. She decided to take legal action alongside his ex-girlfriend to protect herself, realizing that she had been living with a dangerous, deeply manipulative sociopath who would stop at nothing to control and deceive the women in his life. She eventually packed her bags, left the town, and cut off all contact, grateful that she had discovered the truth before she spent any more of her life with a monster. This leads us to our second story, which takes place in a small hardware store in a quiet city. The victim is a 29-year-old man who worked as an associate at the store. He was a big guy, about 6'2", muscular from years of heavy lifting, but generally a quiet and peaceful person. He worked closely with a 49-year-old woman named Nancy, who was the opening manager. They had a good working relationship, or so he thought. One morning, about an hour before the store was scheduled to open, the two of them were inside doing inventory. The store was quiet, the lights were half on, and the morning routine was going exactly as it always did. Nancy realized she had left something in her car, so she unlocked the front door and stepped out into the parking lot. A few minutes passed, and when she returned, she was not alone. Walking right behind her was a man holding a gun directly to her back. The young man froze in absolute terror. He had never been in a situation like this before. The gunman immediately pointed the weapon at him, shouting at him to keep his hands where they could be seen and to follow his instructions. Nancy, as the opening manager, had the keys to the store's vault, which was a secure, double-locked room in the back office where they kept the high-value money orders and cash deposits from armored trucks. The gunman forced the young man to stand still while Nancy went into the vault and emptied all the cash into a bag. The entire ordeal lasted about 10 minutes, but to the young man, it felt like hours. He kept his eyes down, doing exactly what he was told, knowing that any sudden movement could cause the gunman to pull the trigger. Once the robber had the cash, he ran out the back door and disappeared into the morning fog. The moment they were sure the gunman was gone, the young man ran to the phone and dialed 911. He was shaking, his voice trembling, as he gave the dispatcher their location and described what had happened. But the moment he hung up the phone, Nancy walked up to him. She did not look relieved that they were alive. Instead, she looked absolutely furious. She glared at him and asked, "What the F is wrong with you?" The young man was completely caught off guard. He stared at her and asked what she was talking about. Nancy immediately launched into a screaming tirade. She began calling him a pathetic excuse of a man, shouting that he had done absolutely nothing to protect a single mother when she was in imminent danger. She yelled that he should have jumped the gunman, fought him for the weapon, and risked his life to save her. The young man tried to explain that the man had a loaded gun and that trying to fight him would have likely gotten them both killed. But Nancy refused to listen. She continued to scream at him until the police cars pulled up outside with their sirens wailing. The actual store owner was on vacation that week, but when he heard about the robbery, he immediately contacted the young man, expressing his deep concern and giving him the next 2 days off with full pay to recover from the trauma. The young man did not mention Nancy's abusive rant to the boss yet, as he was still trying to process the sheer terror of having a gun pointed at him. He kept thinking about what Nancy had said. She had kept screaming about her 19-year-old son, who was in college, asking who would take care of her baby if she died. The young man tried to convince himself that Nancy was just suffering from an extreme adrenaline rush and panic, and that once she calmed down, she would realize how insane her expectations had been. But as the days went on, the young man began reading comments on an online forum where he had shared his experience. Several people pointed out that the timing of the robbery was incredibly suspicious. How did the gunman know exactly when Nancy would walk out to her car? How did he know that the store manager was on vacation and that only 2 employees would be inside? How did he know about the vault? The young man tried to brush these comments off, believing Nancy was genuinely terrified during the incident. 2 days later, his store manager called him. The manager had been reviewing the security camera footage from his hotel room. The store did not just have cameras inside, they also had high definition cameras facing the parking lot. The manager told the young man that the police had just arrested Nancy. The security footage showed that when Nancy went out to her car, the gunman was actually sitting inside her vehicle waiting for her. They did not have a struggle. In fact, they stood in the parking lot and spoke casually for a moment before turning and walking back toward the store together. The gunman was Nancy's new boyfriend. She had set up the entire robbery knowing exactly how much cash was in the vault and using her coworker as an innocent bystander to make the crime look legitimate. The young man was hit with a wave of intense anger and fear. He realized that Nancy had not been screaming at him because she was panicked. She had been screaming at him to build her cover story, wanting to make him look suspicious for not acting, or perhaps even hoping that he would have tried to fight her boyfriend so her boyfriend would have a reason to shoot him. She was entirely willing to put a young coworker's life in danger and traumatize him forever just to steal a few $1,000s. A couple of weeks later, Nancy's attorney reached out, asking if she could meet with the young man. He refused. A few days after that, the company representative passed along an email from Nancy. In the email, Nancy apologized. She claimed that her boyfriend was an extremely abusive drug dealer who had held her captive and forced her to assist in the robbery under threat of death. She claimed her angry rant at the young man was the result of a mental breakdown because she had desperately hoped he would somehow overpower her boyfriend and save her from her abusive life. The young man read the letter, but he felt no sympathy. He replied through the representative, stating that he appreciated the apology, but would never forgive her for what she had put him through. Nancy eventually took a plea deal, and her boyfriend was sent to prison on numerous charges. The young man began going to therapy, slowly working to rebuild his sense of safety in a world where a trusted supervisor could turn out to be a criminal mastermind. Our third story takes us to the life of a 29-year-old woman who had been dating her 30-year-old boyfriend for 2 years. They had recently gotten engaged and decided to take the big step of moving into a nice apartment together. Their life seemed perfect. They were planning a beautiful wedding, they had stable incomes, and they were deeply in love. But shortly after they moved in, the young woman began to notice a minor inconvenience. Her underwear kept going missing. She had a large collection of clothes, probably around 50 pairs of underwear, and she was the type of person who kept spare sets in various gym bags, purses, and suitcases just in case of emergencies. Because of this, whenever she could not find a specific pair, she would simply assume it was tucked away in one of her bags. She did not think anything of it. One morning, she was getting dressed and wanted to wear a specific pair of underwear that matched the bra she was wearing. She searched her dresser drawers, her laundry basket, and her closet, but could not find them anywhere. She walked out into the living room where her fiancé was sitting and asked him if he could check the dryer, thinking they might still be in there from the last load of laundry. Her fiancé looked up at her, let out a small chuckle, and said that he had sold them. The young woman laughed, assuming he was making a weird joke. She asked him again to please just look in the dryer for her, but his face went serious. He looked at her and said that he was not kidding. He was entirely serious. She stood there, completely frozen, trying to process his words. She began to press him for details, her heart starting to beat faster. He calmly explained that for the last 3 months, He had been regularly stealing her worn underwear out of the laundry basket and selling them to random strangers online. She felt an immediate wave of intense nausea. She felt violated, dirty, and deeply betrayed. Without another word, she walked into the bedroom, packed a large suitcase, and drove straight to her sister's house. She sat on her sister's couch, crying and shaking, unable to understand how the man she was about to marry could do something so incredibly disturbing. Her fiancé began bombarding her with text messages, trying to justify his actions. He argued that they were planning a wedding and that he had only done it to make extra money so he could customize her wedding band and buy her a nicer ring. But she knew this made absolutely no sense. They were not broke. They both made good money and they had plenty of savings. Her sister convinced her to go back to the apartment while he was at work to pack up the rest of her belongings. While they were there, they searched his computer and his email accounts to find out exactly what he had been doing. And what they discovered was far worse than they could have ever imagined. He had not just been selling her underwear, he had created online advertisements on various classified websites pretending to be her. He would write graphic, highly explicit descriptions under her name, talking about how much she enjoyed knowing that strange men were using her underwear for their own satisfaction. He had also gone through her phone and his own messages to find semi-explicit photos she had sent him in confidence. He had posted these photos online alongside the listings to prove to the buyers that the underwear actually belonged to her. When he met up with the buyers in person to deliver the items, he would lie to them, telling them that his fiancée was too shy and scared to meet them herself, so she had sent him instead. He had sold over 20 pairs of her personal clothing, making around $900. When she confronted him over the phone with this evidence, he finally admitted that the story about the wedding band was a lie. He confessed that he had gotten a massive thrill out of knowing that other men were aroused by his fiancée. He tried to downplay the severity of it, comparing it to selling a used designer handbag or a pair of shoes. He begged her to go to couples therapy with him, insisting that it was just a silly mistake and that he only loved her. But she was completely done. She realized that he had systematically violated her privacy, stolen her property, and distributed her private photos to strangers without her consent. She left her engagement ring on the counter, cut off all contact, and moved in permanently with her sister. With the help of her sister, she compiled screenshots of all the online advertisements and emails, and they contacted the police to file charges for non-consensual sharing of intimate images and theft. She was devastated that her relationship had ended this way, but she felt incredibly grateful that she had discovered the dark, twisted reality of her fiancé's secret life before she walked down the aisle. Our fourth story involves a 25-year-old immigrant woman living in California. She had been married to her 31-year-old husband for 2 years, and together they had built what appeared to be the perfect American dream. They had a beautiful house with a large yard, 2 pets that they adored, and a wonderful, supportive circle of friends. She loved her job, she had a green card, and they were actively discussing having children. She truly believed she had found the partner she would spend the rest of her life with. But one afternoon, her husband vanished. For 2 whole days, his phone went completely dead. She was frantic, calling hospitals, searching the streets, and crying herself to sleep, fearing that something terrible had happened to him. On the 3rd day, he finally walked through the front door. He looked exhausted and disheveled. Before she could even hug him, he sat her down and delivered a piece of news that would permanently shatter her world. He had been arrested. He explained that he had traveled to meet up with who he believed was an underage girl, but it had turned out to be a police sting operation. He had spent the last 48 hours in a jail cell. The young woman felt her entire reality collapse around her. The man she loved, the man she wanted to raise children with, was a predator. For the next year, her life became a living nightmare. The trial dragged on, and her husband refused to give her any real details about what he had done. She had to resort to secretly searching his computer and reading public police reports just to piece together the terrifying truth. He had been actively searching for minors online for a long time. Ultimately, the trial concluded with her husband avoiding prison time but being ordered to register as a lifetime sex offender. The shame and embarrassment were overwhelming. Even though California did